Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Daniel Roman here for winteriscoming.net, and today I'm joined by fantasy author Brent Weeks, author of the best-selling Night Angel and Lightbringer series. His latest book, Night Angel Nemesis, is out from Orbit Books on April 25th, and it marks his return to Night Angel after more than 14 years after finishing the original trilogy. Brent, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk Night Angel with me today. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for inviting me here, Daniel, and sharing your platform with me. I appreciate the chance to get to speak with people who love fantasy like I do.
Yeah, absolutely. It is always an enormous pleasure to talk to other fantasy nerds, which a lot of fantasy authors are, because that's how you ended up here. So
That's right.
I kind of wanted to ask just right off the top, why now? So you finished Night Angel quite a while ago at this point. It was kind of your debut series, one that a lot of readers fell in love with your work through. What made now the right time to come back and pick up the story of Kylar Stern and Durzo again?
Well, it's now is the time, partly because I promised readers that I would come back to this, and and that's important to me. But actually, when I finished Night Angel, you could find in the back of I think the third book, there's an interview with me, sort of saying, "Hey, what's next?" Or they might have put it in the first book, but whatever. What's next? And I said, well, I haven't exactly decided. I thought I have this plan for how to, I left some narrative hooks. I have some things I want to do still in this world. Or I might go do, I might try something different. And ultimately I had decided, I think I said this in the interview, I decided I wasn't quite ready for the ambition, the big ambitious plan that I had planned for the world of Night Angel. And so I said, you know what, I need to do some cross training. I'm still a young writer. There's some things I need to get stronger at some things. So I decided I would take just a quick, 3-year, 3-book trip and brush up on some skills and come back and start this 9 years ago or something. So Lightbringer obviously grew in the telling, and in the meantime, I've always had this plan in the back of my mind, but I also was a little nervous because when I wrote Night Angel, I had this big, grand ambition, but I also knew, not a 3-book ambition, which was quite ambitious enough. Writing a trilogy is quite difficult, but I had sort of a longer narrative. I had this longer narrative arc, and I'm like, that's going to sound really arrogant if I come out of nowhere as a debut author and say, I've got this, 10-book series in mind. So I was like, I'll just keep that on the down low. Plus, who knows what will happen in the meantime. But that story has simmered in the back of my mind. I've always wanted to come back, especially, this is just a writer thing, especially when it was really difficult in Lightbringer. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go back there. It's going to be so easy. It's going to be wonderful. It's like dancing in the fields of easy writing. So I've always wanted to come back. And of course, that's always a lie. The next project always looks easy. So I've had those characters in my mind, and I've wanted to come back for so long. And coming back was a real joy. I wondered, it's been a long time. Will I be able to remember how to write these characters? Will I and like talking to Mama Kay again, like having Mama Kay speak, it was like, bang, she was right there. I'm like, oh, she's here. She's back. I know her. It was like visiting an old friend, a very scary old friend, but visiting an old friend. So I've always wanted to come back, and now I get the chance to, and maybe reveal a little bit more of my long-term plans.
That's awesome. So it's so cool to hear about a series like this so correct me if I'm wrong, but you had this plan in place to much earlier. So this isn't something where it's like, I had a new idea for Night Angel and we're coming back. This is something you've wanted to do for a long time. And it definitely comes through in the book that it feels, obviously somewhat this is an illusion because you're writing, you spend untold hours making these perfectly crafted lines, but characters like Mama Kay leap right off the page immediately. So I wanted to ask, kind of related to Lightbringer, since you brought it up, there are now a few different entry points for people to get into your work. So I was wondering if you could just what would you say to someone a reader who maybe hasn't checked out your work yet, What are their optimal starting points in your opinion?
Okay, my publisher has the right answer here is
Okay.
definitely start with this book and definitely buy it next week.
Nice.
um, uh, but honestly, I did have these thoughts in mind. It's like, so I'm starting this. I'll tell you a little bit about the overarching structure, just because
Yes.
this is a little complicated. Like I wrote the Night Angel trilogy, and like actually you can read the first book and you can be done. If you're like, you know what, Brent Weeks isn't for me, you're not trapped. It's a full little narrative. Obviously, there's narrative hooks. You can say that was good. I want to read the whole Night Angel trilogy. You can read the Night Angel trilogy and it's done. Like it's a complete story. It ends. But obviously there's still some questions. There's like, I wonder what happens next with some of these people. There seem to be hints that more things are coming. You know, I hope I did that successfully. So you can start certainly at the beginning with Night Angel. But what I have here is the Kyler Chronicles are going to be their own trilogy, maybe four, but I think I'm doing it in three. And so they are their own story. I tried to make this okay. Some people will have just reread, or they'll have read the Night Angel books for the very first time. Everything will be fresh in their mind. I don't want to bore those people. Okay, that's one group of readers. Other readers read it when it first came out 14 years ago, and they know the characters, but they don't remember that stuff. They've read a lot of books in between, and then other readers will come in for the very first time. And like, are those readers going to be like, I have no idea what's going on? So I wanted to do my narrative challenge was to capture all of those readers and make it work for all of those readers, partly because I've learned a lot as a writer and I am able to tackle more ambitious things. So part of me is like, oh man, I started that book when I like The Way of Shadows when I was 25 and my skills are so much better now. Like my writing is so much more fluid and like, no, you got to start with this one. So part of me really wants people to start with this one, not just my marketing hat on, because it's like, this is me at my best. And like, this is me doing some really great stuff. But I do think it's a place where people can start it. They can see, is this Brent Weeks guy for me? Or is this just, it's not my thing? And that's totally fine, because there's books that are great that don't work for people. You know, I read the Bronte sisters and I'm like, I can't do this. This is not for me. Doesn't mean it's a bad book. It's not for me. So I think it is a good place. I think I have written it so that you can read, you can grab this book, you can understand what's going on. There's obviously hints about stuff that you don't know very much about, but I try to fill it in, I hope artfully, so that it doesn't bore the first group of readers and gently reminds you as you're going forward. So I hope you would read this book and say, that was really fun. Like I understood what was going on, but I feel like these characters had a lot more depth. And then you would go back and you would read, the Night Angel trilogy. Yeah, I am sure there's going to be some fans who say, no. You must start with
always.
You must do this in order. You must start with The Way of Shadows. So and that's fine. Like I understand that perspective as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, I was just going to agree with you that there are always going to be those fans who you have to start with book one. That is just the way it works. But for me personally, Nemesis is my introduction to your work. And I did that on purpose, knowing it was coming out, because I've heard you say that it can be read on its own. And, that there's always a question of, is that, marketing? Because like you said, that is the right answer. Absolutely. Is my current book is the one to read. But also I was curious what that would feel like, knowing how beloved the original trilogy is, to just dive in on the new one. And for what it's worth, I think it totally works. Part of that is how different Nemesis is. So correct me if I'm wrong here, because again, I haven't read all of the original Night Angel trilogy yet. But it seems like most of that is third person in terms of the way that you're writing it. So it will feel very familiar, I think, to a lot of fans who read, George R.R. Martin and those types of fantasy novels. Nemesis is a very different book in some really interesting ways. So I don't know if this is considered a spoiler. If it is, we can always cut it out. But so Nemesis is largely written in first person. It's it's an account being relayed. And there's a question, a very clear question of how reliable that account is at times. So I'm curious, like, can you talk a little bit about the evolution of the style of the series? Like, what made you decide to make that sort of leap for Nemesis to really give it that different flavor from the original trilogy?
The reason that I wanted to shift narrative styles in this one was partly to give this series its own identity. But another huge part is, as a writer, I'm always looking for new narrative challenges. I'm trying to grow my skills, and I'm trying to do different things. I know I could probably make a really great living, like doing books just like the Night Angel trilogy, yearly, and just put out the same thing, change the names a little bit, change who's Kyler killing this week, the assassination of the week, and I could spin that out for a long time and have a very lucrative career. But that's just not the kind of personality I have. If I do that, boredom is death for my art. So I always need to be doing new things. I always want to be stretching myself and trying things that are hard and scary for me. So I thought, you know what? I've done some experiments through Lightbringer of doing first person narration. I really like the character work of getting inside of a character's head. And I said, you know what? The big question for me as I came back to Night Angel was, do I have enough artistic freedom that I can grow and change? And do I want to spend the bulk of my career in this world? Because I just finished Lightbringer. I'm 40, I finished Lightbringer. I'm 42 years old. I'm like, these books take a long time. And I don't have 5 massive series left in my writing career. Like, actually, I've got to figure out, where do I want to work for the rest of my life? And like, I could do that in Night Angel. I like have the narrative hooks, but can I be happy doing that? Can I do stuff that's neat, different, and kind of pushes some boundaries in fantasy in ways that I think stretch readers and might be uncomfortable at first? And I was like, let's try it. I'm going to take these characters who feel familiar. I'm going to pull you in, I hope, with some things that feel familiar, and then we're going to play a little bit more advanced game here. And I hope that readers will be introduced to that and be like, okay, I get this. The complexity is introduced at a rate that I can understand. I can start to figure out what's going on, and then I can start to ask more questions about, wait, how reliable is this? Well, if that's not what's happening, what is happening? Where does this frame story fit in? When is that? Like, you have all these questions, and I deliberately wanted to play a little harder games and have readers like finish the book and then be like, I want to reread that and figure out, was that all there all along? And so I just thought, I'm ready to do some new and harder things, and I really hope readers will come along for the ride. So part of that was, I want to give it its own identity. I want to let readers know, you're with Brent Weeks. Things are going to be different in every book. I'm going to do different things. I'm going to fail in new ways, but it's because I'm going to be trying. I'm always going to give you my best. So those were some of the thoughts. And when I came up with, there were some tricks of how I do the first person narration, how I would do the present tense, and yet keep the tension high. I thought, like, because usually when somebody's doing first person narration, you're like, well, they make it through fine, right? Because they must be telling the story 20 years from now. And so I was like, can I still have there be danger in this first person narration? And I was like, I know exactly how to do that. So I had a lot of fun with it.
Cool. Yeah, it definitely is unique. There are some formatting things in this book that I don't know that I've ever seen or haven't seen much, in terms of, because it is being presented as Kylar's account of these events. And there's very much a feeling of, you, the writer, are writing this as Kylar is recording this, and he's going through his own kind of writerly struggle. So is this narrative style something you plan on sticking to throughout the rest of the Kylar Chronicles?
I intend. Well, shoot, I'm trying to figure out how much
without spoilers.
Let's see. Certainly elements of this will continue. There's reasons why this story in particular needed to be told this way. And the next story will be the next chapter will be told differently, I think, for reasons that will become obvious as you reach the ending.
Cool.
So it's like you get something a little bit different. And like if you are able to go from reading, third person limited past tense narration, which was what Night Angel trilogy was in, and you hung on, and you were able to, like, it takes a little bit to get into, like, this is weird, this is different, what's going on? Okay, I get it. If you're able to make that transition, I think the transitions I have planned later are going to be fine for you. They're not as hard as this one. This was the most difficult risk I took, because I know that there are readers who are just like, I don't like first person. I don't like present tense, especially. I hate that. And I was just like, if I lose those guys immediately, bummer, I'm sorry. Like, I guess I lost you. If it doesn't work for you, it just doesn't. But this is what I need to do. And I think it pays dividends. It's not just to like satisfy my whims. I think it's necessary for the story and how the story's told, that it be from this very strong point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes total sense, just thinking about what I've read of it so far. And just to be clear, for those of you watching, there are some third person parts in this book. So it's not a total deviation in terms of, you'll still get that flavor that I think came through in The Way of Shadows as well with those sections. But it does feel very fresh and very new. And also was surprisingly funny. That's something that, like, I've heard that you had a great sense of humor, but usually when people told me about Night Angel, they didn't lead with that. They talked about other elements of the books and then mentioned that there was some great humor in there too. But it seems like that really came out even more in Nemesis because of the voice. So one thing I was curious about, because this story is being recorded in this specific way, did you use dictation at all when you were writing this?
No, I didn't. I'm a very strong auditory kind of learner myself. I frequently, it takes me a little longer than I wish it did to write these novels, and I speak every line of dialogue as I'm writing it. And then when I edit, I wait, no, the stress doesn't fall in the right place there. I got to juggle that sentence order so that you see, or sometimes you do tricks like italicizing things, like so. I've got a fairly strong ear, I think, and that's getting the dialogue right is important. And then I do whole editorial passes of, like, does this character sound like themselves? Like does Mama K sound like Mama K when you go through, because she's got a very strong personality, and that should come through in how she even speaks, I work really hard on that. It's not I feel like I have a good ear for other dialogue, but like I didn't grow up in a place with a lot of different dialects, so I don't write a lot of dialects, and like parsing that kind of stuff I can't do, just because of where I grew up and what voices I heard as I was going along. So dialogue's important to me, and I'm glad it sounded like I like that it came across to your ear as well.
Yeah. I mean, the question of, that's not something I would normally think to ask. Like, did you use dictation to write this thing? But it's a testament to how natural the voicing of Nemesis feels. That is something I wondered, because it really does feel very conversational. And it is a total blast for that reason. And I hope that people take to the style, because it is nice to see a fantasy author do something so different within one series, that really kind of sets different eras of that series apart. But there are ties, obviously, lots of ties to the original trilogy. One that really struck me, I feel like the ties are going to be apparent to people who've read the books kind of from the gate, like out of the gate. The opening scene of both Nemesis and Way of Shadows have an interesting parallel of two different characters being in a situation where they're wondering about their assassin profession in relation to a child who happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was wondering, were there any, themes or parallels or things like that you were especially excited to try and sneak into Nemesis or revisit in general?
Oh man. Yes, I definitely, the world of Night Angel already has such strong like thematic things running through it. It's like we start with an orphan in the slums. It's like here's this good kid in the worst possible place he could be, and completely without responsible adult supervision. It's like, here's a kid. He's fairly innocent to start with, but like he is in a rough environment, and now you see the transmutation of like, here he is, this guy's the adult now, and he's looking back, and there's a kid during this. And so when he has thoughts about that kid, it's like you're like, how far have you come, Kyler? And how do I feel about how far you have come? And how do you feel about little Kyler? Right? Like that kid's doing stupid stuff, or maybe is involved, or maybe is not involved. And like, how are you going to treat that person? And like, how uneasy am I about all of these things? And there's definitely a moral complexity to these things of where, okay, here's the smart thing to do, and here's the right thing to do. That's gonna screw up everything if I do it. And Kyler is put into these situations constantly, because of course he's like my main question when I was starting, to back up a tiny bit, one of the reasons that the worlds hang together, or that you feel like there's this foreshadowing, or that it all sticks, is the first novel I wrote was set in this world, but 20 years later. So I wrote the novel. I was a young writer. I was 20 years old. It was 20 years after the events of this. I had this one really amazing character show up. I actually had 3 or 4 characters that cross over, and I love these characters, but the novel was broken. I'd done some things wrong structurally. And so when I threw it away, I was like, you know what? I'm going to throw this away. We're going to not worry about it. But I like some of the world building I did, and I know where things are going. I know where history is headed. And in that, there was this one character who showed up, and I was like, that guy's a badass. He's scary. And yet he's got this code. And so who is he? And then the question that I started the Night Angel trilogy with was like, how does a basically moral person decide to become an assassin? Which is a completely immoral job. And I was like, it would have to be a kid who's in an environment where he is not protected. He is in the worst possible environment, and becoming an assassin seems like the best option at the time. So, and that was the way that I solved that. I'm going to put him in an impossible place. He takes a bad job because his other options are worse. And so that was how I stuck Kyler in there. So that's how sort of we got here. And that's how I know a lot about how the world fits together, because, well, I cheated. I wrote that other book first. Which didn't feel like cheating at the time. Throwing away 5 years of work was really hard.
That's the cheating that requires the most work I've ever heard.
Yeah, exactly. So then this gives us a chance to reflect on Kyler's character growth, and to remind us of who Kyler is, and also I hoped by starting in the middle of a job, right? Like Kyler is doing the most Kyler-y things possible. That it would be like, okay, this novel is going to have action. It's told a little differently, but it's not like some weird avant-garde experiment that's all about the author wanting to experiment with us. It's like, this is going to be a story competently told, that's going to be fun and exciting, and there's some weird elements about it, but I trust that there's enough familiar elements that it's going to draw me back in. It still is the same author of Night Angel. He's doing some different things, but I think this could work for me. So starting Kyler in the middle of an assassination of somebody who got away, like a bad guy who got away in the Night Angel trilogy, and you're like, I want that person to die, and Kyler's like, I want that person to die. You're like, yes. I thought it would be a good on-ramp for readers, and then the parallels are kind of laid throughout. I didn't want them to be not so thickly that you're telling the same story.
Sure.
Sort of the criticism of the new Star Wars, the first one was, it's just exactly the same. I didn't want it to be that thick. But
it's a fine line to walk.
Callback, and there's some things that will remind you of stuff, and the more familiar you are with Night Angel, the more it will remind you. But I think it will work on its own without that basis.
Yeah, Again, I'll vouch for that. It definitely is working for me reading it right now. So those things, it is fascinating because it definitely makes you want to know more about these characters and the story, because there's clearly an awful lot of very dramatic stuff that happened in the original trilogy. But you said something interesting a second ago that I want to back up to. You mentioned the book that you had written 20 years ago, or that is set 20 years in the future from where Night Angel is, your first novel that you wrote. Mm-hmm. You also earlier mentioned having a broader plan for the Night Angel series that we're kind of just now really getting to see as readers. So kind of a two-part question. Can you talk any more about your just kind of broader plans for Night Angel? But also, is that 20 year in the future book still something that you are hoping to revisit, or is that in the trunk now?
Okay, great questions. So the Night Angel trilogy would be so I decided to tie this in, and I was like trying to figure out the least annoying way to structure this and for readers to understand it. So the Night Angel trilogy is it's a trilogy. It's books 1 through 3. It tells a complete story, but it is also books 1 through 3 of the Codex.
Yeah,
and the Kyler Chronicles are 1, 2, 3, but they are books 4, 5, and 6 in the Codex. Yeah. And then we will have a pivot again to probably a focus on different characters and maybe a jump in time.
Okay.
I have a couple different little narrative options that I'm still experimenting with. So I expect another pivot there, and then I'm going to revisit some of the major events that I wrote in that original book. Like maybe some of the maybe 1 or 2 of the characters I will keep. The rest of it, I'm not even going to look at it again, though. It's sort of like the major events of the world, the big things I wanted to happen. Those are still going to happen. The core of some of the characters are still going to be there. But man, I'm not going to try to save writing that I did as a 19-year-old.
Yeah.
So it would be too painful for me to look at it.
Yeah, that's super fair.
So the entire series, I'm trying not to make promises because we know how promises can go. But I do envision there being this is the second movement that we're in right now. I do envision there being a third movement. So then once you got done with that, you're talking 10 or 12 books all together. And I have plans for that, but I'm not ready to share those plans in case I need to change them. So I have this. I still have the master plan in mind. I'm just we've all seen what happens when you make promises and then something comes up, and life does happen, and sometimes that's just like very foreseeable, and sometimes it's totally unforeseeable. So I just want to be careful, and I'm trying to be completely I'm trying to be forthright with audiences and just be like, hey, I screwed up. This book took longer than I wanted it to. I'm stuck or whatever.
Yeah.
And say, I don't know when the next book is coming out. I generally put out a book every 2 years. I've had a couple times where it took me longer. The final book of Lightbringer, which was a monster, a 400,000 word monster, it took me 3 years, and I had a version that was done in 2. And my agent and editor thought it was good enough to put out in 2 and keep on my schedule. And I said, it's not good enough. And so I took the 3rd year, and I just did that. Readers have been very kind with me when I've been frank with them and just been like, man, I'm not ready with this, and I'm sorry. I know you guys are waiting, and here we go. So I'm trying to give myself some grace, but be honest and tell readers what I know. And so far, they've reacted really well with that. So
yeah, I think that's such a smart way to go about, especially a long series like this, where you're looking at multiple movements, multiple kind of sub series within it. To not come out of the gate with, hey, I'm Brent Weeks, and here's my 12-book series. You'll read it when you're an old person. Just right. Kind of laying the groundwork as you're going. Before the call, we got talking a little bit about George R.R. Martin, obviously is relevant to this discussion. We don't need to get into the nitty gritty of book delays and stuff like that. I'm very much in the camp of a book takes as long to write as it takes, but transparency is good. But you had mentioned that he was an influence on you. So I was just curious, kind of about, the story there. How did you discover George's books? Were there any that particularly hit you or that were particularly influential?
Yeah. So I think I discovered, I was an early discoverer of George's, not of his earlier work, but of the Song of Ice and Fire. I think I read it in '97.
Oh wow!
Well, I didn't get the hardcover version because I was a poor kid. Well, I wasn't a poor kid, but I was a poor high school student. I didn't have any money.
Yep, get it.
And like I wouldn't buy hardcovers, right? Like because of a new writer that I've never read before. Come on, man. But I saw the cover. It looked really different. I read the book and I was like, oh my gosh. This is fantastic. Like, this is really different. And this writer is really good. Like, he's really in control of his skills. Yeah. And I liked how he was doing something that seemed really new. And then when I read the second book, I was like, this is even better. Yeah. And I was like, this is how you should do it, because as a reader, I'd felt so betrayed by trilogies that, like, the first book comes out the gate and you're like, this is amazing. And then the second book, sort of nothing happens. And then the third book, like, the finale is interesting, but you're like, man, that was like 1.5 books that I got out of there. And I was like, no sophomore slump for George. Like, look at this. This is amazing. So I love that he kind of took the genre and he just ran his own way with it. He was like, yeah, I'm doing my own thing. And you're going to have these super long chapters, which I thought were brilliant. Yes. So when I was a young writer, I actually studied like what does he do? Like, one thing that George does, really long chapters. He's got amazing hooks and buttons. So you'll finish the long chapter and like your natural tendency is to be like, okay, I'm done, time to go to bed. And like, so how does he handle that? Well, one, his hooks are always, or his buttons at the end of the chapter are always good. And your button is just, you wrap things up in a neat way. You want to spin things in a new way. And you want to introduce some kind of new danger. Like, oh crap, but I want to see what happens to John next. So he'd always do that really well. And he would not always do it with physical danger. There would be new kinds of danger, and there would be relational things that were introduced. And you're like, oh no, I need to come back to this person. So you're always like, I want to come back to the person. And then you would just naturally, because it's sitting right there, you would read the first couple of sentences and then you'd be like, oh, this is super interesting. So his hooks were always good too. So I thought the way that he handled information was really good. I thought that the structure he dealt with was really well. I thought that what he did with his cast was brilliant. Yeah. And which is, he basically uses grotesques, and grotesques go back to Faulkner. And it's like, well, like technically, you don't have a guy who's got a missing tooth. You take a guy and he's got no teeth, or he's got no nose. You don't have a guy who's 6 feet tall. He's 7.5 feet tall. You have a guy with no ear. Like, people are super exaggerated, and it works because it helps keep a huge cast separate in your mind, and you're able to remember. It's the girl's not 18 and an assassin, she's 11. It's like when you, it's really diverse and almost you have kind of an exaggerated cast. It's like, wow, they're all the way here. It really helps keep them separate in readers' minds. And I was like, that's great. That's a really good trick, because your characters all tend to bleed together, especially when you have a large cast, especially when you have these big family names. It's like how do you keep all of these separate? And I thought that was a great trick. So he had numerous things in there that I thought were really, really brilliantly done. And then I looked at later as I was becoming a writer myself. I'm like, well, how does he do these hooks and buttons? How does he introduce new danger? How does he introduce all of this backstory? Because fantasy is incredibly exposition heavy. There is so much to teach people about the world. So George does this thing where he introduces the information when it becomes important to the characters to know. Yeah. So it's like, it is relevant to what I'm going to do today. Who Grandpa was sleeping with. Well, now I'm going to tell you about who Grandpa was sleeping with, or whatever. Yeah. I mean, And so I thought, oh, that's how you do exposition. You make exposition interesting to the reader because it's important to the characters. So George does a lot of things technically really, really well. And then I actually got out a pen and like, what's he doing here? Why does this work? And it's like, oh, okay, that's why it works. Gotcha. So as a craftsman, I was just really impressed with his work. And that was, and then him going his own way and being like, yeah, fantasy has been like this. I don't care. I'm going this direction. I really like that. I like that attitude that he took. So big influence on me.
That's awesome. Wow. That's such a fascinating thing about the slightly exaggerated characters as not a mnemonic device, but as something to keep them straight. Just thinking about the way he does settings too, because like what you described for that is pretty much the same thing he did with the wall. Right, like he visited Hadrian's Wall and said, well, it's fantasy, let's make it more memorable. It's now 1,000 feet tall and made of ice. Keeping out monsters instead of just people who live in a different country. That is so fascinating. All right, I think we're running close on time, so I have a couple of like quick lightning round type questions for you. You ready?
Okay. Yeah, well, yes. I'm very slow.
They're easy.
But is there such a thing as slow lightning? Okay, we'll just roll with it.
Yes, lethargic lightning. So
I like that.
I found a new nickname. Oh God. Are there any authors or books that you've been particularly enjoying reading lately? And extra points if they're new.
Okay. Yeah. No, like nothing new. I've been on an old writing kick.
Okay.
So like this is stupid because a lot of who are your favorite writers? Like everybody brings out, oh well, Shakespeare, and they bring out all their hoity-toity kind of things. Like, but honestly, I've recently read Plutarch. Plutarch's Lives, which is like this beast of a thing. So hold on, I'm gonna actually grab this off my shelf.
Okay, I'm living for grabbing stuff off the shelf. Yes, please show me Plutarch's Lives. Oh my God.
So this, oddly enough, I had to get a nice version of it because it's so stinking brilliant. So he sort of tells historical lives. He looks at. He tells his history instead of doing the big moments in the leader's life, because he's looking at military leaders and he's trying to make the case that the Greek military leaders are just as good as the Roman military leaders. So he pairs a Greek with a Roman and ties them together. And then instead of looking at like the big military moments in their lives, he's like, I want to look at the moments in their lives that were indicative of the kind of person this guy was. Like this shows who he really was at core. And then so he goes through all these generals. And after a while, you get this very actually epic fantasy kind of feel because you're revisiting like, okay, I saw Mark Antony from his own perspective and with what was going on in his life. And we told his whole story. And now I see Julius Caesar's perspective. Yeah. And now I see Brutus's perspective and I see his whole life and I'm seeing how these guys are interacting with each other and like you're interfering with my story. And so he tells these all in sort of parallel. Well, so you get this sort of parallax view of like all of a sudden you've seen this, like you've taken a whole book's worth from one guy's perspective, and then you're doing another book and it intersects a little bit, and then you're doing another book and it intersects in a couple different places, and like all of a sudden you've got this like rich 3D tapestry coming together of all these people who interacted and we're all super amazing people in neat ways, and you're like, whoa, like this is like an epic fantasy in a way. I'm getting this whole structure of Roman society and of various Greek societies. So I just thought it was really fascinating. And Plutarch is actually a brilliant, with a name like that, you're like, oh, it's some dusty old Roman dude. It's like, he's actually a brilliant writer, and it's really neat. So that's dorky, but it's I
cool.
find I like that stuff. I think authors are. I've been coming up with this new theory that that it is the artist. It is not a perquisite, a perk of the artist to be eccentric. It's a prerequisite. Yeah, I'm still working on that one. But perquisite.
No, but the point's good. The point is valid, I think.
flow. Uh, and like eccentric just means outside of the center, right? It just means
Yeah.
out of the center of the circle. And for society, I think it's really important that artists be outside the center, because like you're going to have artists like they should be around in every direction. And then some of them are going to be outside of society, but they're going to be the direction we should be pulled. And they're going to say, guys, look at this. This land over here makes sense. And this is how we should understand ourselves. And this is how we should understand society. And then all of society goes that way.
Yeah.
And the only way we can do that is if we say it's okay for artists to be weirdos. It's okay for them to be wrong. Because most of them are going to be wrong. And so one of the things that I do to indulge my eccentricity, like, because I'm a pretty normal dude for an artist, honestly, but it's like I read different stuff than everybody else is reading. Yeah. Right? Like, so it's like, man, you know what? I've heard of Plutarch's names, 50 times, but I'd never read anything by him. And then I read it. I'm like, oh, there's a reason this dude was super famous for a really long time. And he was taught in schools for a super long time. It's like, oh, he's actually good. Like, he's great. So that's how I indulge my eccentricity. I'm not trying to show how artsy I am. It's just like, this is interesting to me. And it's not interesting to most people. And there's some hurdles to understanding it. It's, it's a little different style, but like I find some gold there. So that's what I've been reading.
That is so cool. And so it's interesting to hear about like a historical, I don't even know what to call that. Is it a reference novel? Because is it a biography? It sounds like somewhere in the middle of
paired biography.
Yeah, that's just not something you hear about very often. Biographies in relation to one another. But especially reading Nemesis and just thinking about how that is an account of a person, but you are seeing how it intersects with other people. That is a fascinating influence to talk about, because that idea of, it's my story and then it's interjecting at XYZ point with this other person's story. I think that was already something that stood out to me quite a lot about Nemesis. So that's very cool to hear that you've been reading Plutarch.
Well, thanks. There's a phrase I will never hear again. So it's very cool to hear the
yes, it is. It is recorded so in perpetuity. Yeah. I'm glad you're reading Plutarch. Another question. I saw you mention this. You did a Reddit AMA this week, which if you're watching this, it was last week, but the AMA is still up. You should absolutely go check it out if you're a fan of Brent's work. I saw some people asking you about ice cream, and it seemed unreasonably cruel. So I am going to ask, as someone who's also in a non-dairy house for medical reasons, what is one of your favorite non-dairy desserts? Take that, Reddit.
Oh man. No, I just, you brought up dessert and now I'm just going to go kill myself. I'm sorry.
Oh no. I'm so sorry.
Oh man. You just made me think of like flan and creme brulee. All my favorites are just full of I guess I like a cobbler these days, right? You can generally do cobbler. I can have butter, thank God. So I can have butter, or at least not ridiculous amounts of butter, but I can have enough that. So sure, I like cobblers. I like chocolate. So unfortunately, dark chocolate these days because milk.
Yep.
But anything chocolatey generally hits the spot too. So.
Cool. Awesome.
How about yourself? Tell me your discoveries.
Well, without going too deep in the weeds, we've been on kind of an autoimmune diet here. So a lot of stuff with like chocolate substitutes. The name is evading me right now. It's a powder, a lot of maple syrup based things. So like you can freeze banana and freeze it with like a maple syrup chocolate coating that is dairy free. Okay. It's gonna bug me. I will find the name and send it to you one way or another because it's going to bother me now. But yes, I have recipes for days, and most of them are like making things that sound awful that actually taste really good once you eat them. Yes. like avocado and date frozen bars, which are actually delicious, but on paper it's like, I don't know if I want.
Sounds terrifying.
Dates for dessert sounds weird, but it's actually great.
Right. Yeah, like it does seem like there's a place in Portland, and the name is escaping me, but like there's a dessert shop, and like you eat their desserts, and you're like, actually, I would choose to eat this even if I could have dairy. And you're like, that didn't used to be true. Like it used to be like, here, take your carob cupcake. It tastes just like chocolate, and you're like, that doesn't taste anything like chocolate. Stop lying to me. It's just rubbing it in my face that I can't have chocolate. You know, it's like, don't lie to me. And like these days, they actually have some things that are, you're like, that's actually amazingly good. So, thank goodness we live now. You can actually have a reasonable life, even with some challenges.
Yes. Thank you, modernity, for these new recipes. Carob powder is what I was thinking of, which tastes weird on its own, but if you combine it with other stuff like maple syrup, it starts to taste. It's still not chocolate, but good in its own way.
Right.
Okay. So last question.
I told you lethargic lightning. I told you lethargic lightning. So
that's okay. I'm not in a rush. It's been just fantastic to talk to you. So last question here. You seem to enjoy putting Kyler through the ringer. Mm-hmm. So let's end by fielding one Kyler's way. If you had to send any 3 assassins or other fictional characters to apprehend Kyler, who would you send? From other stories, not your own. Can be.
Film,
movies, books.
Let's see. I don't know that I could come up with 3 great ones that would which world does, where does Kyler face off with like James Bond? Is that
okay?
Does all of MI6 come after him? Like there was like Jack Ryan's friend who was like the badass guy who just didn't care. Anybody could shoot Kyler and just be lights out. So that's fair. And I'm trying to think of put him up against like Wolverine, and Kyler would have a really, really tough time. So Wolverine would actually kick Kyler's ass. So there you go.
That's a good one.
Especially Hugh Jackman Wolverine. So there we have. I try to do these things where like Kyler has sort of these ridiculous powers in some ways, but one, they don't come with a manual, which was what he doesn't know how they work. He doesn't know what the limits are, and the only way to test the limits like really, really suck. So it's like I don't want to find out about that one, and like that mistakes are really still possible. And then in some ways, even in Nemesis, he's just a kid. I mean, he's like 21 years old, and he's got this very narrowly defined life experience where he has spent all his time doing this one thing. And that means there's all this normal stuff he's just never done. Yes. So he's not good at it. So it's like, he's not James Bond. He doesn't walk into every scene and be like, I'm the master of my domain, no matter what the domain is. It's like he wouldn't know how to book an airline seat. It's like he's in some ways he's such a normal guy, and he's got no clue about a lot of things, especially relationships, because he hasn't had any. He's been he just trains like that's what he does for Night Angel. So I try to give him some texture that way. So if you put him out of his out of his usual environment, he'd be screwed.
Sorry to say for Kyler. Yeah, that oh man, that definitely makes him a much more interesting character, that he is not just a be all end all, is great at everything. And you've got that a little bit with Durzo in the books. Kind of as a counterpoint, not that Durzo is perfect at everything, obviously, but right. Kyler thinks throughout Nemesis a few times, my old master would basically he'd have his shit together, and I do not in this situation. Right. So that makes sense. You put Kyler out of his element and things get dicey. but I still wouldn't bet against him.
Yeah, there's this narrative trick. The best place I've seen it used is in the beginning of Spider-Man 2,
Okay.
which I think Alvin Sargent or somebody wrote. And it's like, so you get to the end of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans. And you get to the end of Spider-Man, like that's the normal like hero's journey. You went from the nerdy kid, now he's a stud, like everybody feels really good at that. And like, where do you start with that character in the next movie? It's like he's already a total stud, right?
Yeah.
Well, he's Spider-Man. I mean, he's a super. How can you anchor to that? And the way you anchor to that is you give him normal problems. You give him like he's trying to deliver pizza. And you know, he's on his bike, he's trying to deliver pizzas on time, and that's the initial setup. And it's like, so all of a sudden he has all these superpowers, but his superpowers actually don't help him with the problems he cares about. He wants to be nice to Mary Jane, and actually he can't get there on time, and actually his superpowers hurt him in the things that he wants to do. It's like, do I stop those thieves? Well, I got to go stop those thieves. This is super inconvenient to me delivering pizzas. So it makes the powers be not something empower him, but something that disempower him, and that are super inconvenient for his actual goals. Like it brings his what he wants versus who he is directly up against each other, and he loses. So that's a thing that I stress throughout. It like really emphasizes the humanity of the characters. It's like, dude, like you might be able to leap super high. Doesn't help you get dates. You know, it's like that's just, you know, the things you care about. This is actually going to screw up your life. And I think that, one, it's much more realistic than the James Bond, I've got everything together all the time. And it's also like, well, how did you get good at these things? By only doing them. And so it gives you a character who's got messes and who feels kind of more real, because like they don't have it all together. Like they're really good at this, you know. It's like, man, you know, Michael Phelps, you're a great swimmer, and you got busted for smoking pot at a party. Like, are you serious, dude? It's like, oh, he's just a young guy. You know, he just does stupid stuff sometimes. So I like that about I like that as a trick, and two, it feels better. It feels more real. It draws me to Kyler. So
it definitely makes a character more relatable, I think. And it's kind of cool to hear you use. I know I said like quick questions. I'll be the lethargic lightning here too with you, but like it's cool to hear you reference a superhero thing, a superhero movie, kind of explaining this point, because something about Nemesis, it has reminded me almost a little bit of a superhero story in that way that, you know, Tyler is figuring out his powers. I was a really avid Spawn reader for years, and that's another superhero where he's in a situation with basically a suit, and he doesn't know what it does. So he's figuring it out on the fly as he goes, and it often goes really, really badly for him. And seeing it, so it made me, Nemesis specifically, more than The Way of Shadows, has made me think of a superhero story, and I feel like would appeal to people who like those kinds of stories, just because of, you know, how deep you are going on Kyler as a character, and like you said, him being really, really good at a handful of things, but actually his normal life stuff often conflicts with that. So that's very cool.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, this is what books do that movies can't do. Like, movies can give you a spectacle. They can move you in real ways, but books can go deep into the psyche of a character in a way that no other medium can. You see exactly what they're thinking, not just what they're doing. And sometimes what they're thinking has very little to do with what they're doing, or they'll have a unique perspective on what they're doing. Yeah. So I took care of that guy, and you're like, whoa, you know, the movie would have to show how he did it, and then he'd have to be nonchalant afterwards. But like any second or third tier thinking that the person has to do, or character building, like the movie doesn't have that. It just has images and images and dialogue, and you can dive directly into the character and give them an inner life in ways that movies can't do. So I think that's way more interesting, and that's what I love doing. So I hope that readers enjoy that. Like apparently you are.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And so for those of you out there listening, Night Angel Nemesis comes out on April 25th. So you should definitely check it out if you've enjoyed this conversation, if you enjoy Brent's work. And yes, I will vouch. It is an excellent book. I'm really looking forward to getting through the rest of it. Brent, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about your work and Night Angel and influences and Plutarch. It's been a total blast.
All right. Thank you so much, Daniel. Really, really appreciate you having me and love your questions. It was really fun talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. And for those of you out there listening, don't forget to like and subscribe, and make sure to check out winteriscoming.net, where we write about fantasy and science fiction stuff pretty much every single day. And for now, we're signing off.